Welcome to the Supply Chain Beyond the Hype podcast with me, Chris Clowes, and a variety of guests from across the supply chain world, ready to share their insights, stories, and experience to help you go beyond the hype. Welcome everyone to this month's edition of Beyond the Hype Supply Chain podcast, where today we'll be talking about the benefits of in-house logistics operations versus outsourced. So logistics clearly plays a crucial role in the supply chain, delivering cost, efficiency, customer satisfaction, and a core part of the overall business. Logistics can account for anywhere between 10 and 20% of a company's revenue, a huge proportion of the operating cost for a business, which means optimizing cost can be a key lever for improving profitability. Poor logistics also leads to delays, increased operational costs, and wasted resources. Companies with optimized logistics can report up to 15% faster order fulfillment rates. And the Hook Group, for example, have just announced a 1 a.m. order cutoff time for next day delivery, which is pretty much same day delivery. Customer satisfaction is also key. For many online retailers these days, the only physical interaction with a customer comes from your logistics provider. And research shows that 87% of customers say that the shipping and delivery experience will directly affect their decision as whether they shop with a brand again. On the other hand, a negative logistics experience, delayed deliveries, difficult returns can erode trust and loyalty almost instantly. And finally, for many companies, logistics is becoming a strategic asset. Amazon have turned it into a competitive advantage with innovations like same-day delivery and real-time visibility. This approach isn't just about moving goods, it's about creating a seamless experience that aligns with business strategy and customer expectations. So I'm delighted to introduce this month's two guests. We have Tom representing the in-house perspective from doing logistics in-house, and then Kate, who's going to cover the 3PL's perspective. We're here in a very snowy Milton Keynes. The weather has really decided to come in. So delighted to introduce firstly Tom.
So hi, I'm Tom Rice. I'm the Director of Operations for Astro. First of all, Chris, thanks for asking us to come here on the first snow of the year. It's been a bit of a baptism of fire in my brand new electric car, which has performed incredibly poorly this morning. So that was all nice. I've got about 15 years experience in supply chain and operations. Recently I'm in lighting, but before that I was in Amazon and e-commerce, coffee, handbags, shoes, apparel. So I've got a bit of a mixed bag, and I've done both in-house logistics and also 3PL as well. So thanks very much for having us today.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm really pleased to introduce our second guest, Kate Jones.
Thank you, Chris. Lovely to be here. Quick introduction from me. So Kate Jones, I'm a commercial director at Iron Mountain. I'll talk a little bit about that later in the podcast, potentially. But just in terms of my background, I've been in the industry for 15 years. I've always been 3PL side. I've worked at DHL and Wincanton, predominantly within FMCG retail, a little bit of technology, and then stepped into property for a couple of years around the time of the pandemic, which was a really interesting opportunity to sort of take a step back and look at how the 3PLs were reacting to some of those pandemic challenges rather than being in the mix. And then recently I've rejoined the 3PL arena, joining Iron Mountain to head up the commercial team for the UK and grow a new customer base, encouraging people to either outsource or change provider. So really looking forward to touching on some of the topics today, Chris.
Thank you, Kate. And Kate's promised not to deliver too much of a hard sales pitch, especially for Tom sat next to it. In short, today's logistics landscape is defined by the need for flexibility, cost efficiency, sustainability, and a drive for technological innovation. Companies that adapt to these trends are better positioned to meet the demands of a competitive and ever-evolving market. Today's podcast is going to look at who's best placed to deliver this. Leverage in-house product knowledge and the company knowledge, or outsource to the experts. So let's get into the detail. Our starting point is going to be the case for in-house logistics and the benefits that come with that. So we've heard enough from me, and Tom, it'd be great to get your views on benefits of doing logistics in-house.
So you've mentioned the challenges that supply chains have faced over the last sort of couple of years. I go back to, I started working in 2007. So there was a 2008 financial crisis. And we've had multiple wars. There was Brexit. There's been inflation, driver crisis, freight containers going up to $20,000 a go. So all of these things that happen that businesses don't have any control over whatsoever. So if you can at least take control of your warehousing and logistics like we have at Astro, there is a bit of a case for, what if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. If you're already delivering a good customer experience, if your costs are reasonable, Kate will obviously say there is, costs to be taken. And I'm sure there are, but you have to sort of map that against the risk to the business. And I think business risk and resource and mapping and planning are all very, very important. And that's why if you've got some control, at least over your warehousing and your delivery to your customers, that is at least something that you don't have to worry about every single day.
It's really interesting you mentioned all of those challenges, and I think that the 2-3 century long-term average interest rates is 5%. We've had 0.1% since 2007, 8, 9. So the fact that everyone's panicking these days about 5% interest rates is crazy. Not to sound like my father when he had 19% interest rate on his mortgage, but 5% is normal. And that shows a growing business or a growing economy. From your perspective and your businesses, is branding, how important is branding in logistics? And do your customers care?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I think as long as for me, as long as the customer gets the product when they ordered it, and that's within a reasonable time frame, we are able to deliver that in the UK. We've got a very large warehouse, so we were able to flex up and flex down. We've built our own assembly line, which we built in 2 days. So we've got these, things that we can do very, very quickly because we have that kind of level of control. But in terms of the customer experience, and I can only speak as a consumer and a customer myself, I'm not really that bothered who delivers it, as long as they deliver it on time and with a window that we say is going to be delivered. So we chose to work with a carrier, even though they were not the most cheapest carrier that we could have gone with, but we chose them because they gave us the hour of delivery window. I think that's the most important thing. People are busy. They've got different lives now. Sometimes they go to the office. Sometimes they're working from home. Sometimes they try and play tennis, even though they haven't been able to do that for a very long time. So, the fact that people have these busy lives now and we are able to say, okay, this is your window. I think that's, for me as a consumer, the most important thing.
Yeah, really good points. And so the assembly line that you mentioned, was that to deliver increased customization for customers or something different?
Exactly. So, we've got a new product line coming. We needed to do some testing to make sure that can we actually deliver? If we're going to deliver, how much is that going to cost? Now, of course, we could have done that with a 3PL, but the fact that we're able to just go downstairs, build an assembly line and then go, okay, yeah, this is what we think it's going to cost. That gives us some speed as well. Could we have done a better job? Can we, outsource that? Of course, these are things that we can look at. But I think the other thing for me is as someone who manages a large portion of the Astro business, watching the staff and the team there try and think, how do we problem solve this? And then I can see, okay, these are the people that are good at problem solving. It's a very good way of illuminating potential high performance for the future as well.
That's an interesting perspective. And Kate, when you're talking to customers, do you see these challenges? Do you get this kind of pushback with challenges around outsourcing?
Not necessarily. The majority of customers.
So you're saying Tom's wrong?
No. let me finish. So the majority of customers that I'm talking to are already outsourced. That's a very different conversation to talking to a business who's currently in-house and they're thinking about going to a 3PL solution. That's a significant change, and it is about taking your hands off the control and the process, which is what Tom's talked about, and trusting another business to do it to a level or beyond that you're comfortable with. There's pros and cons as always. I think selecting the right 3PL who understands your business and partners is really important. And it is balancing, some of the benefits of a 3PL around scalability, investment, bringing that centre of excellence. Because you made quite an interesting point in terms of going down to the shop floor and actually seeing, who's doing what, where people are thriving, and really maximising that. Equally, I would say there's that in a 3PL, probably at a much bigger scale, in that quite often I've seen some really good innovation and technology in one customer project, and it's made me think, right, well, how do you inject that into a different sector? So you do get some of that, but in a different lens, if you like. So pros and cons, I would say.
Yeah, really good points. And perhaps it's not a true in-house operation, but do you see when you're talking to customers that have been with one 3PL for 10, 15 years, they have no idea how that 3PL is doing the work because they've just become so ingrained and so integrated. Do you find challenges there when someone is looking to move and they don't know the processes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a number of customers that I've worked with over the last couple of years who've had 20 plus years with one 3PL, and they are quite far removed from data and process and what happens on a day-to-day basis. And it makes it really hard for them to think about change and moving. They're still very much connected to what's happening. But that 3PL, rightly so, is very much ingrained in their business and almost then becomes a bit of an in-house solution in itself. So it all really comes down to sort of what a customer's strategy is, and their priorities, be it cost or scalability, expansion, geography, etc. And holding the 3PL accountable to deliver the value that ultimately, they're paying margin on top of the in-house piece.
Yeah.
So just on that, I think timing and planning is really important. So you mentioned what the customer strategy is. I think that's super important. Every business has a limited resource available. Every business has only got a certain amount of people, certain amount of projects in time. So I think moving to a 3PL, that might be great because you might get an operations director who comes in and says, I want to stamp my mark on something, or a procurement person that comes in and say, I want to, save the company X. But actually, if the strategy is growth, and as long as your in-house 3PL or in-house warehouse, I should say, is capable of sustaining that, isn't the most important thing driving the resource behind that growth element. So I think there's a big question that every business needs to take before it goes to, whether it's outsourcing or reviewing their logistics, is what actually is the strategy of the business, and is operations an enabler, or is it okay? Because there are things that you can live with that might not be great, and there are things that actually, if we don't do this now, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, we're going to fall over quite quickly. So I think that planning, timing, and strategy element, in my experience, is the bit the business get wrong. They just do things because somebody comes in and they say we should do it. So there's a big thing of, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, there's elements that are probably easier to influence within a business. So when you've got big capex requirements around property and automation, I think that's where a 3PL can really offer an advantage. And you might tell me differently, but they can really offer an advantage because, depending on the structure of the business, and some of the 3PLs out in the market are willing to make that investment, that can really open up new avenues in terms of efficiency and differentiation in the market. Because I actually think, whilst, I think you said earlier on, the customer's not too fussed about who's doing the behind the scenes stuff, it's getting it on time. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle part that does make a difference, particularly around value-added services and traceability of product, depending on which sector you operate in. And I think that's really where the value should come from. It shouldn't just be, are you storing my product in the right place with a low price? There's much more to it than that.
And when, Tom, have you seen a company make a good strategic decision or a long-term view as to their logistics structure?
So I worked at a company that bought a lot of companies very, very quickly. And I spent 12 months effectively just collapsing logistics networks, which for some sad act like me, that was the most fun I've ever had in a job. But, I've seen that kind of optimize, bringing that center of gravity in closer. So all of a sudden you've got mass. So for a business, you might be quite small, but actually when you aggregate everything up, all of a sudden you watch the service levels go up because all of a sudden you matter to that business. So I think that's been done pretty well. I've seen it done really badly, probably more than I've seen it done well. And again, that might be just because I'm a bit of a negative person. But casting my mind back to places where I've seen it done well, I have to say I've seen some joint ventures done very well with 3PLs, which you couldn't do in-house. I think that becomes quite a
Like
challenge.
partnerships or genuine joint
Partnerships.
ventures?
Well, no, so partnerships with other brands. I can't name those brands, unfortunately. But I think when I didn't know that was a thing, and then I watched a company do it, and we've got a huge amount of benefit, cost benefit, service benefit from that. So, and again, speaking personally, for Astro, we're trying to, sublet some of our warehouse, which is proving to be very, very difficult, purely because of the legalities. Every company that wants certain aspects of the building, and it always falls down. Costs. We've got to cost every time, but where we've always fallen down is the legalities. So I think that's a real benefit in terms of the sort of 3PL when it's been done well. They're the only things that I can think of off the top of my head.
I always think that logistics is just a rung up from IT on the priorities and the gratefulness and gratitude within an organisation. No one ever says thank you for the 99.9% that was right. It was the 0.1% that went wrong, and it's always the most important customer, but actually they account for like 1% of sales, but it's still a nightmare and all hell breaks loose. So thank you for that. We're now going to move on to the case for outsourcing. And Kate, without being too salesy, as a commercial director, what's your perspective and what's the benefit of outsourcing?
Well, I just, was listening to Tom in some of the points that he was making, and one of the last ones is around where you've potentially got excess space and not being able to get rid of that in a very easy way with some legal challenges and whatnot. I think just picking up on that point, one of the biggest things a 3PL offers is flexibility and agility in the supply chain, both from a space perspective and a people perspective. So it would only be right for me to mention Iron Mountain because it's where I am.
We're going to keep a tally of how many times you mention Iron Mountain.
That's fine. But what's been really interesting since I've joined the industry, or over the last sort of 10 years or so, is everything probably felt much more stable 10 years ago. People were in a building, they've been there a long time, and things were sort of ticking along nicely. Things happen every few years. It's just the way of the world. Over the last couple of years, what we've really seen is people are requiring flexibility because they're not quite sure what's actually going to happen. That obviously has a massive impact on inventory levels, where they store goods. The challenge from their end customer has been quite significant in terms of expectations. And so 3PLs, and in particular Iron Mountain, really offer flexibility. So investing in high quality real estate, that obviously brings along with it a couple of benefits around the ESG, which are becoming more important. Having access to shared labour, shared innovation. So hopefully I'm not jumping too far ahead here, but one of the pieces of kit that we've invested in at Iron Mountain is Dexery, which is a robot which scans all of the pallets over the night, creates a digital twin of the warehouse, and really allows you to interrogate real-time information to make decisions within the supply chain. And not to take away from in-house, but I think I would expect that in a way there's potentially some limitations of one team trying to do everything, whereas in a 3PL you have a centre of excellence for solutions design. You might have another team that are looking at technology and innovation, and it's really bringing all of those different thoughts and minds together. And a lot of 3PLs have a global footprint, so they're bringing a perspective from different geographies, from different industries all together, or at least they should be, and really sharing that with the customer. And that's one of the biggest benefits of being with a 3PL, is tapping into that experience and knowledge, investment capability, flexibility, and bringing that all together so that from a supply chain perspective, you can be agile, adaptable, and face into quite tough market conditions when they hit you.
Yeah, I think inventory is a really interesting point, and ASOS have just announced that they've managed to reduce their inventory holding by 50%, but that's taken them 2 years and significant impact on profitability. You mentioned the investment in technology as well, and when you're a logistics company and warehousing is your sole focus, investing in technology in the warehouse is obviously a priority. Do you think, Tom, running an in-house operation, you've got to compete across the organization to demonstrate and justify investment in the warehouse when that could be going into manufacturing or product design or marketing?
Absolutely. I think, the business cases and the return on investment they're far more challenging. We're a medium-sized business, I guess. We don't have infinite money. We're doing okay, thank you very much. But it's challenging. So we're not always the loudest. For me, as somebody who's completely focused on growth, I think I would spend, if it was Astro's money was my money, I would spend that on product and marketing, because return on investment there is going to be significantly quicker. Again, Chris and I were talking beforehand, Astro's not a logistics company. We're an incredible lighting company. So yes, we have a much more quiet voice when we're asking for the money from the FD. But again, we do a bloody good job. And at the moment, our outbound is at the level that we're very, very happy with. Our returns are dealt with very, very well. All of our metrics are within that kind of pretty good sort of mark. Yes, not world class. Let's not kid ourselves. If we outsourced it, we might get slightly better service levels. But again, as a business, I think you have to take a view of what's good and what's good enough. So you'll probably hear me saying that an awful lot today, which will get very boring and probably get edited out. But you've got to really focus on the things that drive the most amount of value. And our in-house UK operation, and I'm sure other in-house operations, they do the best that they can with what they've got. I'd love more technology in our warehouse. For me, I'd love robots and things running about.
Someone to talk to.
Exactly. The only person to talk any sense or anything. But I think, again, is that going to drive the most amount of value? Is the return is it going to be the thing that changes the business tomorrow? I couldn't say that.
Yeah, I think really, really interesting. And Kate, you talked about 3PLs acting globally. On a scale of 1 to 10, how global and integrated in your experience, do you find that 3PLs actually are?
Interesting question. Very interesting question. So probably it's not straightforward to actually be such a global business in a 3PL environment. And I think part of that comes down to the cultural differences within a country, the legislation. Some markets are much more advanced. The UK is a mature market, and some other regions aren't. But I've been able to collaborate in my career with people within a 3PL environment who have, a bit like yourself, worked in different countries, different geographies, different customer bases, and I wouldn't have had access to those people had I not been in that 3PL environment, and I then pass that value back to the customer. So there's been a couple of times where, when I've been looking at a customer's requirements, we'll do a solutions design model and say, this is the ideal scenario, and we might be trying to solve a couple of challenges or problem statements that we've agreed with the customer, and it's about sort of thinking, right, well, I've seen that before, but it might have been more in an automotive environment or a technology environment. Well, why don't we try and take some of that learning and put it into this scenario? And without getting into sort of too much detail, a couple of years ago, I worked on a public sector bid where they were trying to sort of bring a lot of procurement together, storage and distribution, etc. And that was all about not just storing the products, but creating a platform where the end user could access that inventory and it could be managed in a particular way. That was taken more out of a retail environment. So that was like total innovation for public sector, because they'd never had anything like that before, but it was probably very standard in a retail environment. And I think if that solution had been managed in-house, you would never have accessed that type of thinking and innovation. And I think that's what a 3PL can bring.
You mentioned something a little bit earlier, just around people and working globally and learning from different people. If you may both indulge me for a moment a viewpoint, I think that both 3PL and in-house operations are only as good as the people that you're dealing with and that are running it. As Scala, we've dealt with logistics companies across Europe and around the world, and the same organization can be terrible in the UK and world-class in Germany. and that comes down to the people. Would you agree with that, Tom?
100%. People and process. I mean, ultimately, if you nail those two, there are things that you can do. You can drive so much. If you've got, I read a thing on LinkedIn the other day.
I hope it was one of my posts.
Of course, 3 high performers can do more than 20 low performers or 20 medium performers. I can't remember the exact thing. That's how much of an impact it had on me. But if you've got someone who, or a couple of people that are just know everything, and you can't, it's very difficult to extract that and put it into 3PL or put it into an SOP. Those, I have a couple in Astro, one in particular that I can give him a problem and then I just leave him for 4 or 5 hours and then he comes back and he's knocked it out of the park. And that's great. That's everything that you want from a manager of a business, is to be able to have somebody like that. I think people and process are the absolute ultimate. I guess it's the same in 3PL. If you've got good people and you've got good processes, it's fine.
It is, and it's probably a point that feels really relevant to me at the moment because I will mention it again, Iron Mountain. So as you know, Chris, we predominantly have been in store and record management for 70 plus years, and it's only been the last 2 years that we've gone into warehousing and logistics. And so one of the things that we don't have is 15, 20 years of logistics experience. So what we've been really focused on is bringing the right people around the table who are credible, authentic, can talk the same language as a customer, share the same pain and experience and solutions. So I absolutely recognise that it is the people that drive a business, particularly in logistics, because you really have to roll your sleeves up and put the hard work in. There's always a challenge or something doesn't quite go to plan, and it's only as good as the people sat around the table that are willing to get a solution going.
Yeah, I think supply chain, I think during and post-COVID, we got much more, got highlighted an awful lot more and what supply chain managers actually do. And a number of memes of people on fire on a bike over the edge of a cliff. And this was just 9 a.m. Monday morning for a supply chain manager. Looking at some of the potential challenges of outsourcing to a 3PL, and we've spoke about this within Scala before, is that the relationship between a 3PL and the customer can often be quite awkward or quite tetchy and quite conflicted that you don't see in other functions. So a marketing team as part of a major FMCG company tends to have quite good relationships with the agencies that they work with. The same goes with the finance team when they're working with KPMG or Deloitte. But in supply chain and logistics, there seems to almost be this constant tension that we've often we talk about it and say, well, there's fundamentally very different principles and objectives between a 3PL and a customer. The customer is trying to do it as cheaply as possible, balancing service that comes from that. And the 3PL is trying to make money. So they need to put a margin onto things and make money. How do you get over that, I guess, that conflict and that challenge as a 3PL, Kate?
Looks like all good relationships, transparency and trust. No, I think you've got to have a conversation really up front about what the customer's trying to achieve, because if it really is the lowest cost in the market, then that looks like this, and if it's about creating long-term value, that's going to drive different mechanics for the relationship really. And I've experienced both, where the customer might see a 3PL as serving its purpose and that's sort of it. Whereas I've worked in other scenarios where the 3PL has been really integrated into that supply chain and almost acted as an advisor and added a lot of value. So I think it depends on how it's set up and the intention, and there has to be investment made. But what I have also seen is that when contracts are in place for a long time, people sometimes maybe take their eye off the ball and think, well, they're not going to move anywhere else. Things aren't going to change. Cost of change is significant, so we'll stick doing what we're doing. But we discussed this in the Scala forum recently with one of the FMCG brands. That only really goes so far. So constant investment of time and thinking and value.
Tom, you mentioned before, if good is good enough, then why do you need to upset the apple cart? And And we say when we're running tenders for customers at Scala that unless you're saving at least 10% on service isn't a challenge, don't even think about moving, because the integration, the challenge, the customer service issues. I think when Sainsbury's went live with their new warehouse on the M25 in London, shelves were empty. I think Superdry are still recovering from a poor implementation in one of their warehouses. But it's really good to hear that almost those two different perspectives, that am I in this just to outsource something that's a bit of a pain and I just want you to manage it, or is this about a true partnership? And I think in my 20 years, I think I've definitely seen people moving more towards I'm looking for a partnership.
It's
more value.
the thankless task that is supply chain and logistics as well. I think we touched on it. The 99 things that go right, nobody cares. One time it goes wrong. I think, and I've been guilty of this myself as I'm getting older and fatter. I'm slightly more relaxed than I used to be. I'm
bolder.
Well, yeah, I'm covering it up a lot very well at the minute. But having people, particularly contract managers if you're working with the 3PL, it's very important. Shouting at someone and sending stupid emails, you burn your bridges very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I would say, having been around the block, not too many times, but probably at least once, is it's actually quite a small industry. You never know who's going to be sat on the other side of the table to you as well. So I think that, coming back to the sort of people piece, if you really need to find very good people who understand the difficulties of running a 3PL as much as anything, because it's not easy. You're managing sometimes tens of thousands or millions of things a week and a month. There has to be that level of humanity to it as much as anything, and being able to pick up the phone. I still think one of the most, and I'm young, but I'm actually quite old in my thinking, is having that ability to pick up the phone to the person who's managing the contract is way more important than sending the worst email in the world. You can do a lot very, very quickly in a 2-minute phone call to get things done. I don't think that is emphasized enough. I think we're all happy to hide behind emails and Teams and Slack and goodness knows what else, but pick up the phone, be a bit of a human, and you'll be surprised what you can do.
There's some crazy statistics about Gen Z just not answering the phone because they're worried that something bad is going to happen.
Really?
And I must admit, even myself. And it's a really low barrier, but a lot of the work I do is in the UK or in different countries. So if I use WhatsApp to ring someone, it's free rather than using a phone.
I thought I was special.
But I think some people don't use WhatsApp for phone calls. And I think it's really odd that, people don't pick up the phone enough. And probably similarly, there's definitely emails or conversations I had 10, 15 years ago that would pan out very differently now and a whole lot less heated. Awesome. That's really good. So thank you for that, Kate. That summary of the benefits and the case for outsourcing. I guess a collective question now. What are the key factors to consider when you're deciding and making the decision to outsource? And maybe, Kate, you can kick us off. What do you see from the people that you're talking to?
So I'll sort of start this by, saying what would be there in an ideal scenario, because it's not always the case. But I think, having a sort of clear definition of the requirements and the piece of business, that can sometimes be a challenge because the customer might not have access to that information because the 3PL they might be with today doesn't want to release it. And then from the other side, from the 3PL that's modelling the solution, you have to be able to work in partnership and have that open dialogue communication. Don't just wait until next week's call to say, oh, we've made these assumptions, are they correct? Pick up the phone, build relationships.
So thank you for that advocacy of 3PLs, Kate. And then, Tom, from your perspective across your career when you've outsourced, what have the challenges been when working with a 3PL?
So picking the right dance partner is really, really hard.
How long have you been waiting to say that line for?
Since this morning when I stood in brushing my teeth thinking, what can I say that's going to make me sound even remotely intelligent? But
sorry, do you want us to edit that so we can do it again?
No, you can leave it in. I don't care. So, I think, look, you do a tender, you ask a bunch of questions, you might do a site visit. It's a bit like buying a house. You go for an hour, you go back again maybe, and then you spend the most amount of money you'll spend on anything in your entire life. So there's a massive risk. I think the other thing as well is a lot of it is a theoretical exercise. So again, I go back to my point. If you've got a procurement person running it, that's a huge mistake. If you've got an operations director coming in, or a new board member who's got an existing relationship with another 3PL, you should always be very wary about the whys of why people are wanting to do something. Speaking from not recent experience, but we had an in-house warehouse at a company in High Wycombe. We did a theoretical paper exercise because an FD said he wanted to save some money. We outsourced it. First 6 months were okay, and then all of a sudden, 12 months, 18 months down the line, I'd left the business by that point, but I bumped into a chap at a train station who told me that it had been a car crash, they'd had to move, then it had to move again. Another business that I'd worked at that were doing recycling, so they had their sort of in-house recycling capability. Again, somebody came in and said, I think I can do this cheaper. They shopped around, they spent 6 to 12 months with consultancy fees, and then they turned around and said, oh no, the existing solution works perfectly. So, it's really, really hard to find that person, which is why I think, due diligence is important, but also calling their existing customer base, ideally not just doing it on the phone, actually going to see them. There are certain things that they will say and then they won't say over the phone. It's always quite difficult to do, but what people say about the 3PL that you're going to work with is really, really important. So Chris is going to mention in a minute, we did a tender. One of the things that gave me the confidence with our new European 3PL is I actually spoke to some of their customers, and they spoke very, very highly, and they were honest. I think that's the other important thing. They said they had made some mistakes here, and they kind of gave us a North Star of where some of the problems would lie. So yeah, due diligence is really, really hard. Risk is massive, and the cost of getting it wrong is going to wipe out any of that theoretical, I'm going to save some money in year 2 and 3. And unfortunately, as I say, and maybe it's me, maybe this is not advocating for myself, but I've just seen it done badly a lot. I've seen some smart people as well, make some big mistakes. And your intuition and your gut feel plays a big part in some of that, I think. Is that okay?
I'm just thinking.
Sorry.
I think I definitely agree on the due diligence piece, actually, and it has to be 2 ways. So I do think it can be really challenging when you're making an assessment of a customer's supply chain, what they do today, what they want to do in the future, and the processes when you haven't got a good level of information. So sometimes that's just not available. But I think the more work that can be done up front, it's going to benefit both parties, because neither the 3PL or the customer wants it to go wrong. So both should be accountable for making sure that either enough information's been given or enough time's been spent really mapping out the processes, assessing the risks, and trying to make it so all of that is avoided. And things obviously don't always go to plan, but doing that exercise is worthwhile.
Can I ask you a question? So you must speak to a lot of customers.
Hold on, I'm the host.
Yeah, sorry.
Hang on, no.
How good, or what's the sort of average quality of normal business's master data? Because I've done a lot of 3PL moves, and every single time the hardest thing is the differences in master data.
20% accuracy.
Seriously?
20% accuracy,
Wow.
yeah, absolutely. It's a real challenge. It's not just the master data, it's the sort of seasonality, the what's happened in the past, the predictability of the future is challenging. But you put all of that together, and then when you've only got 20% of reality and the rest of it is 80% assumptions, unless you are so knitted together with that customer and you keep talking it over and over and over, you're going to find a problem. And yeah, it is a challenge. But that's reality, isn't it?
Find exactly the same when we're doing network design models, logistics cost assessment, center of gravity studies. It's unbelievable how poor data is within organizations. And and there's some thought that AI fixes all of this. But if you're feeding really poor information into an AI model, it can only learn so much, and it's going to fill the gaps. And if it fills the gaps incorrectly, well, what are you left with?
One of the things I've noticed that's really interesting, and I'm with you, you pick up the phone and speak to people, you get all of the information sent through from procurement, and it says one thing, and then you'll speak to the guy or the lady that's been there for 15 years, and they're like, yeah, ignore all of that, because this is actually how it works on a day-to-day basis. And these are the key challenges we've got with our 3PL. So quite often there is a disconnect in the customer organisation between procurement and supply chain operations. And for me, it's the responsibility of commercial director and my solutions design team to sort of go and investigate, ask the questions, and then play what we've heard back to both sets of stakeholders. Because quite often they don't even want to be on the same call.
Yeah.
That's quite an interesting dynamic as well.
I think one of the other problems, I've seen with finding a 3PL is the sales director or the commercial director might oversell. I don't know anything about I might, but again, speaking from experience, they promise you X, Y, and Z, and then when you look under the hood, there's no engine, and you're like, well, how do you miss these things? So yes, you can agree on the commercials and everything, but it's a bit like what you said. You speak to someone who's been there for 10 or 15 years. How do you do that during due diligence? How do you say to the guy, actually, can I just go and speak to someone who knows what they're talking about? Because they're going to want to hold everything back as much as possible. Again, I've been stung by this. I think Chris was sort of involved in that as well. So, their real life experiences of somebody saying, yes, this is your brand spanking new shiny car, but it's got no engine. So good luck getting it to where you need to. I think that's a real challenge that I've had with 3PLs.
And I think just to face into that, and not for it to be
I'm not saying I'm out
debate, but no, it's a fair challenge for all 3PLs. I would encourage customers to, come and spend a couple of days working from our site. Bring yourself, your team, come and actually watch what we're doing, how we're engaged with colleagues. You can very quickly pick stuff up by standing and seeing what's going on in an operation.
Yeah.
And I would invite customers to do that with Iron Mountain. Chris, it's something that I'm advocating for as a new entrant into the market, that we really invite people in to look under the bonnet. But yeah, all customers should be challenging 3PLs on that. Speak to their customers and really get a feel for what's going on.
Yeah, I think both really good, a really good discussion, and it's good to hear both sides there, and kind of moving that on and that decision-making process on. What do you see the key factors being when deciding to outsource from a client's perspective? And maybe, Kate, we start with you.
So I think it should start with business strategy. So is there a requirement to consolidate the network, expand the network, reach new markets, geographies, access something that potentially isn't available today, and within that make an assessment around cost and how a 3PL can really accelerate you against the goals that you're looking to achieve. And it should be an assessment across the board.
Yeah, I really liked something that you mentioned earlier around due diligence by the customer and the 3PL.
Yeah.
So is this a customer we want to work with, that we think we can work with? And Tom, we've just recently worked together on a project to find a new provider in Europe. What were your key considerations when looking to outsource?
Speed and capability, to an extent, scalability. We're on this growth journey, but Kate mentioned a moment ago that cost is important. It's in the top three. The solution that we've gone for wasn't in the cheapest solution. We went with someone that we believe in. They've got a very strong ESG journey, or ESG story, I should say. Something that we can learn a lot from. They kind of fit with the values of Astro as well. But for me, it was speed. I mean, we have our own warehouse in the UK, in Harlow, to be able to get into the Netherlands in 24 hours, which means we can cross-dock and into our customers in Europe very, very quickly. It's a capability that we just didn't have before. And to be honest, one of the other reasons is we've had so many issues with German customs, which is not a sentence that I thought I would say maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but we had so many commodity issues that were just wrong. So we'd looked at it and said, well, we have this risk here because we're getting stock stuck in customs, even though that we know that our commodity codes are all okay. We've got a speed issue, we've got a capability issue, and we can resolve that all in one go. We've also have an entity in the Netherlands as well. So, kind of that plus cost, you've got 5 very, very good reasons to move.
Kate, when you're talking to customers at the moment, what is the number one thing that they're looking for?
Service. So whether they're staying with a provider or changing to a new 3PL, making sure that service isn't impacted is key. And obviously there's always a push to get it as close to 100% as possible. They want to make sure that their customer has a good experience, and ultimately they're in a competitive market to grow themselves. And so, service for them will be key. Stock availability, visibility, and inventory, all of those things really tie together.
And for both of you, really, where do you think that ESG sits at the moment? So the cost of living crisis has come in, interest rates have gone up. I think a number of large organizations are rolling back their ESG goals. Rumours that the government might roll back targets for electric vehicles. Does it still remain a priority for your businesses, or is it taking a back step? Kate, maybe for you?
Yeah, so ESG for Iron Mountain is, part of the key focus. It has been for the last couple of years. We've done a lot of work globally to consolidate our real estate and bring new grade A facilities into our portfolio, which we've then been able to share with our customers. And ESG is a really interesting one because there's sort of the pure ESG side of it, but then from a people perspective, i.e. the people that come to work at the company and the way that leaves an impression on the customer, I think is quite significant. We've all been into a really old facility versus a new one, and you walk away with a very different feeling.
And you've mentioned that service is really key, and flexibility, you mentioned, Tom. So ESG forms a key part of many organizations' goals and strategy. But in the last 3 or 4 years, since the cost of living crisis, maybe they've become less of a priority, with countries and companies rolling back on targets. So for your organizations and for your customers, Kate, where does ESG sit as a priority?
It's not top of the list and it's not bottom of the list. So it's somewhere in the middle. And what I'm finding now is that ESG is a key part of developing the solution, sharing the ESG goals and how those fit with the customer's values is definitely part of that upfront discussion. And then from a sort of contractual commercial perspective, reporting ESG is just as important as reporting some of those operational KPIs. That wasn't there a couple of years ago. And that's all around sort of picking the right partner, supply chain transparency. I think some companies are maybe dragged more than, that they're sort of leading on it, but everybody recognises that it's the right thing to do. And, ESG is here to stay.
Yeah. And for you guys, Astro, you're obviously a lighting manufacturer using power.
Yeah, so first of all, hospitality has something called EcoVadis. Hospitality is a huge part of our business. It's a huge part of our growth journey. In years to come, if you don't have EcoVadis bronze, silver, gold, you won't even be invited in for the tenders. You won't even get a chance to quote for a room or a hotel. So some companies, I'm sure, may be dialing back. We can't afford to do that. First of all, it's not the right thing to do. But second of all, from a revenue generation perspective, it's effectively shooting yourself in the foot. I think one thing about Astro, we haven't done a very good job of actually reporting all the things that we do. And I actually think surfacing it and reporting it has been probably the biggest challenge we've had in the last 12 months is, when we've looked at all of the things that we should be doing, we're like, well, we're doing that. We're just not reporting it. I think it's a language and a skill that it's not intuitive to me. It has to be taught. You have to go and learn it. And it's a new thing for everybody. I think that's been the biggest challenge for Astro is actually being able to talk in that language and then surface it and then make people understand it as well, because it is new, or relatively new, I should say. I think that's been the big challenges. Do we have the right reporting? Are our suppliers aware? Are our partners aware? Is everybody aware? And are we doing enough to And then what's the next stage as well? So it's part of the roadmap, and we want to get to gold not next year, the year after. What do we need to do that? Because you only are able to solve a problem if you actually know how to ladder up to get to the end goal.
I think we can all spend so much time doing that we forget to take a step back, reflect, and celebrate our successes. So that brings us to the end of this month's podcast, and the first podcast in the Supply Chain Beyond the Hype series. I really appreciate both of your input and thoughts. I think for me, it just goes to show that it's not a one size fits all. There are different solutions for different organizations. And you have to balance that outsourcing question around, well, I lose some control. Are my processes structured? Is my data structured? Because you're setting yourself up for failure if it's not. Versus I can get rid of a headache sometimes. It's not core to my business, and I can work with someone who's a true expert. So on that note, Tom, it'd be great to have your final thoughts and on outsourcing versus doing your logistics in-house.
I think I'm going to sit on the fence and ultimately say it's completely dependent on your business needs and requirements. If your current in-house is going to be an inhibitor or a constraint in the next 3 to 5 years, then you probably need to move. But I think you've got to get very, very good at your planning and your long-term and short-term strategy and execution before you commit to basically getting somebody else to look after your inventory, which is the most, inventory is the lifeblood of any business. You're effectively giving that responsibility to somebody. That's a huge thing to do. It's not quite where we are at as a business. The other thing about in-house, just thinking slightly broader, if you're looking to exit your business at some point, actually having your own warehouse might be a benefit, because if you're going to do a trade purchase particularly, they might say, well, they've got their own warehouse, so it can actually add enterprise value. So whereas you may be able to outsource the 3PL and take an EBITDA benefit, and if you get shares and everything, that's quite nice. But actually, you could get exactly the same level of benefit on exit, because it will add enterprise value to your business. That's obviously dependent on synergies and things like that. But, this misnomer about, it stood at a bit of a money pit, actually, it can be something that drives value into your business as well.
And final thoughts from you, Kate?
I agree with some of the points Tom's raised in terms of, having a clear set of priorities of what you're looking to achieve. And then, if you're already in-house, make the assessment of whether you're going to be able to do that. If not, 3PL offers a lot of opportunity, and just as a bit of a recap, capability, scalability is something that you've benefited from a European perspective. And being able to bring innovation and technology, people, culture, and that sort of lean methodology. There's so much we haven't touched on, but there's so much that a 3PL can really offer. It's all about selecting the right 3PL. So Iron Mountain is the way forward.
Well, we'll see you on a podcast in 2025, Kate. So I really appreciate both of your time, putting the effort in to come down here. And just a quick shout out to the two people behind the camera, Nick and Ella, who've helped us to pull this together from Bridges. So really appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Supply Chain Beyond the Hype. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when new episodes are released.